Hi everyone and welcome. I hope you all are doing well. So today I'm going to be working on the 8th episode of Create This Book by Moriah Elizabeth and me. And I'm going to be tackling 3 new prompts, and let's just say things are about to get extra thick, but you're going to have to wait to see what I have planned for the clay. In the meantime, let's go ahead and start on our first prompt, which is going to be create a growth chart, and it says figure out a way to show some kind of growing process. So this one is going to be done in layers, so let's go ahead and start working on the background first. And for this, I'm going to keep it pretty simple and go in with watercolor because I don't really want the background to be the main focus. So I'm just going to add a sky and a few bushes and some grass. And then as I work my way forward, things will start to become more detailed. And it is going to look a little weird at first because I do have a pre-sketched out fence that I'm painting around. So that's why you'll see some gaps, especially as I start adding the bushes. Which for the bushes, I just go in with a light green first and then squiggle a bunch of darker green over it just to give it a little bit of dimension. And as you can see, I accidentally covered up a piece of that fence post, which is a little unfortunate because I plan to paint that white, so I'll have to do a few extra layers, but that's okay. And for the grass, I'm using that same darker green to create a bunch of little grass strokes, and then I use the light green and do a quick wash over all of it, and that just gives you a nice little detailed effect without having to spend too much time on it. Okay, now for the fence posts, I'm going to go in with this light gray acrylic paint marker to create a shadow effect and to add some wooden details to them. Okay, now I'm going to let all of this dry and then I'll do the shovel later. So I'm going to set this aside for now and start working on the next layer, which is going to be all of the different vegetables that I want in the garden. And the first vegetable is going to be a radish. I just thought it would be fun to make and would give a nice pop of color. So first I put down a layer of light purple as an undertone and then layer red on top of it. And then I go in with deep red for shadowing along with some more purple for details. And then I'm doing a carrot for the second vegetable, and I use a medium shade of orange first to create the shape, and then I add some lighter orange on top of that for highlights and darker for shadowing. And pretty much for all of the greenery, I just bounce around from lighter and darker shades of green. Our third vegetable is going to be an onion, and I use more of a yellow skin tone color for my base layer, and then blend a peachy skin tone color over that, and then I use kind of like a brick red to create very sketchy strokes all over it. And while that is still wet, I go over it with a muted orange to blend those colors together to try my best to get that color of the outer layer of an onion. Then the fourth vegetable is going to be a stalk of corn, which is pretty simple. I just used a lighter and darker shade of yellow and then my 3 shades of green for the leaves. And the last vegetable, or fruit, whichever you prefer, is going to be tomatoes. Again, I'm using my different shades of green for the leaves, and then I blend it yellow, orange, and red together for my tomatoes. And lastly, I'm just going to add a few roots to the stalks, and now we can get them cut out. Now I'm going to set these aside, and I'm going to start working on a watering can, and I'm going to use gray and a really dark blue to get a metal look. And I actually have a special plan for this one, which I think really brings this page together, so stick around for that. And then I just add some highlights to create some shine. Also, I thought it would be fun to add teeny tiny little signs next to each plant, so I'm going to use a dark brown pencil for the small wood details, and then I use a really light tan acrylic paint marker to go over that. And now we can get these cut out too. Okay, let me zoom it out really quick. And we're gonna start working on the next layer. And I'm just trying to line it up to where the sketch of the bottom of the shovel connects to the rest of it. And just ignore these little marks because that was an accident. Anyways, with the shovel, I really should have looked up a reference because I felt like I was struggling to get it to look the way I wanted. So I do end up changing it later. So I'm just gonna go ahead and fast forward to working on the dirt and then fix that shovel later. So for the dirt, I go in with watercolor again, jumping back and forth between lighter and darker shades of browns and tans. And I dab the darker shade randomly all over to create texture and apply the lighter shade over it to blend it out a little bit. And since I added highlights to the watering can, I felt like I needed to add highlights to the vegetation as well, so I'm just going to do that really quick. And now for the scary part, we are going to cut this in half so it fits better in the book when I go to glue it down. Okay, so now before I glue it into the book, I actually need to poke a couple of little holes at the tops of the corners on both pages because I'm going to take the string here and attach it to the top, so that way I can take my little watering can and attach it to the string, so that way I can slide it back and forth and make it look like it's watering the vegetables. And I'm going to use a little thumbtack to do that. And first I try to tie the string to create a little knot to keep it in place, which I was clearly struggling to get it tied. So then I thought I could just add a little dab of glue with the glue gun, but that was a little messy and just burnt my finger. So then that's when I realized it was just as simple as using a piece of tape, which worked out much better. And once I got the string taped down, I glued the pages into the book, and then I took more of that string and added little dots along it with my glue gun, and once dried, I colored them with a blue acrylic paint marker because I wanted to attach them to the watering can to make it look like water droplets were coming out of it. And now I'm going to place my vegetables where I think they should go, and then glue the dirt layer on top of those, making sure that I'm just adding the glue around the edges to create little pockets for them, so that way they can easily slide up and down. And once I get all the little signs glued down, I go in with more dark brown watercolor to create piles of dirt around each sign, and I also do the same for the plants. And I felt like the rest of the dirt looked really bare, so I decided to also add more mounds of dirt throughout the garden to create rows of vegetables. And now for our final touches, I'm going to use some pliers to attach the hoop ring to the string and the watering can, and then burn my fingers just a little bit more to get those water droplets attached. And then I fixed that horrendous shovel, which I think looks so much better now that it doesn't have a line going through it from the separate layers. And then I was kind of bothered by the big gap of dirt that was between the corn and the tomatoes, because the other page had 3 rows of vegetables and that one didn't. So I came up with the last minute decision to create a fun way to add the prompt back in, while also being able to cover up that spot. And I thought creating a bag of soil was the perfect way to do that. Anyways, we are done with this prompt, and I really love how it turned out. I just think it's so fun when you can interact with the page. And now for our second prompt, we are going to create a bumpy page. And it says, lay this page over a textured or bumpy surface. Try to write or draw something. So since the last prompt was a little more intricate, I decided I would do something a little more easy for this one, while still making it special to me. And to do that, I'm actually going to be using a small collection of coins that I have. Some of them are a little more meaningful than others, like this one, for example, was a coin I got at Disneyland Paris. And this one was from the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris as well. And this one was from the Cochum Castle in Germany. And then I just have a few other random coins, like some of these pressed pennies, which I think are always fun. And I have a couple of euros and pesos and a $1 coin and a couple of other ones from like the Austin and Dallas aquariums in Texas. But yeah. Anyways, I'm going to set these aside and pull out a piece of paper because I thought it would be fun to trace over these with some colored pencils. And I'm just going to stick to a small color palette and just use 4 different colors for this. Some of the details on this coin showed up pretty well, but the really small details were a bit harder to see. But I think that looks pretty good overall. So for this coin, it was going good at first, but the coin ended up moving on me, so I kind of messed it up because on these bigger coins, I actually glued magnets to the back of them, that way I could stick them on my fridge. And I was able to get the magnet off the Disneyland one, but I couldn't get the magnets off the other two, so that kind of made it a little harder to keep them still. So I just redid it, and for the Coachum Castle coin, I had to redo that one a few times, because out of all of the coins, that one was probably one of the most detailed, and the design on it really doesn't stick up as much as some of the other coins. And the pesos, those ones definitely worked the best. The euros were a little bit harder. The number itself showed up pretty well, but the smaller details and writing didn't really want to show up. Now the penguin, I feel like that one worked really well. Anyways, I'm going to go ahead and get these cut out. And here I thought I was giving you all a good view, but clearly I wasn't. Now I'm just going to lay them all out and try to figure out what I think looks best and try to make sure that none of the same colors are directly next to each other. And now that that's all rearranged the way that I like it, I'm going to go ahead and get them glued into the book. Very simple, but I still really like it for the personal touches. And the last prompt of the day is going to be create a page of checkers. And it says, put checkers here. For this one, I'm going to create a little checkerboard game that you can actually play. So the first thing that I need to do is create the checkerboard. And I already measured and sketched out all of the squares, so now I can just go in and start filling in all the ones that I need. And I'm going to use watercolor to do that because I thought it would create a fun look. And I also felt like the thick watercolor paper would be a better option for supporting the board game pieces that I'm going to be making later on. So yeah. Also, with it being summer, I wanted to go with a bright summery theme. So I'm going to alternate between the colors of the rainbow, and then I'm going to paint different little fruits randomly on the board as well. Okay, so I'm going to need to cut this in half, but before I do that, I'm actually going to paint the background first, and I'm going to create a grassy background with a couple of flowers, and I'm just going to mark out where my board is going to go. That way I'm not painting spots you won't even see, and because I also want to create a shadow underneath the board. So again, I'm just going to use a dark green for the shadows and strokes of grass, and then go over it all with a lighter green. And for the flowers, I'm just going to keep them white with yellow centers. That way they pop off the page a little bit more. Okay, let's go ahead and get this cut out and glued into the book. And clearly, I accidentally made the shadow on the left page a little too thick, but that's okay. Anyways, now for the fun part, we can start rolling out some clay and start making our little pieces. So I did have to use this brown paper, which did make things a little more difficult, but I'm currently in the middle of working on a different clay project. And those pieces are drawing on the clay board that I do have, so I can't use that at the moment, otherwise it would spoil the next video. So I figured with the brown paper having a very thin waxy layer on top of it, that it would be fine. But sure enough, it wasn't, which you'll see why later. But I did manage to make it all work out in the end, so it's fine. Also, I highly recommend that you don't be lazy like me and just go get your plastic wrap instead of grabbing the closest random piece of plastic next to you. because the piece that I grabbed was way too thick and made it slightly harder for my cutter to cut through the clay. I mean, I could have just used the cutter without the plastic, but I feel like the clay just gets stuck in the cutters unless you use flour or something similar. But again, I was not willing to go downstairs to get it, but it's nothing a little water can't fix. Anyways, I'm cutting out a bunch of little circles and then I'm cutting those in half so that way I can turn them into little lemon slices. Now I'm going to cut out more circles, and this time I'm going to create triangle shapes out of them. That way I can turn them into little watermelon slices. And I'm also going to make a few half slices of watermelons and full circle slices of lemons, because technically in a chess game you would stack 2 checker pieces together to turn them into the kings. But I thought it would not only be fun to use larger slices for that, but I also just think it might be a little hard to stack the little ones together and have them not slide off of each other. So yeah. Anyways, I'm going to go ahead and jump to all the pieces being done and dried, so that way we can start painting them. So first I'm going to start painting the watermelons, and I'm using my acrylic paint markers to do this because I feel like they work really well on clay. And if you're curious as to what markers I'm using, I do try my best to remember to add the items used in each video down below in the description, so that is where you'll find them. Anyways, I use a blend of dark and light red, and then add some white to try to make the watermelons look a little more juicy. And then use a light and dark shade of green for the outside of the watermelon. And then I use a black fine liner to do the seeds. And here's a closer look for you, if I can get it to focus. I think it looks super cute. Anyways, let's finish the rest. For the lemons, I use a really bright yellow first to cover everything, and then I go in with a yellowish orange to create the outer part of the lemons, and then I use a white paint marker to create the details and the highlights. Now that I'm done painting all my little pieces, I'm going to go in with some gloss varnish, and I've actually never used varnish on my clay. I've always just left it as is, or occasionally I'd use Mod Podge because that's all I had. So I thought I'd finally give it a try. And there's a good chance that some of you are probably yelling at me through the screen because not only was I layering it on pretty thick, but I was also applying it on top of that brown paper. And the worst thing that could have happened ended up happening. So I had already painted the backs of each piece off camera, and when I went to flip the pieces over to varnish them, it ended up peeling off the backs, and I had to redo those sides on every single piece. It was quite devastating. But we got there in the end, and this is how our final prompt turned out. We officially have a playable checkers board game, and we have all of the kings on the side so that way we can swap them out like that. And also, I have this teeny tiny little baggie here that I can use to help me to keep all of the pieces together. And I like that it's see-through so that way you can still see all of the pieces when they're in the bag. And I'm going to staple it up here just below the prompt, so if the game does get played, you can still lift it up like this to put all the pieces back, or tilt it down and then let the pieces fall out to use them. But yeah, so we created a colorful interactive page of checkers that you can actually play. And then we created a bumpy page using a different collectible coins that I've collected so far. And my personal favorite, we created an interactable growth chart where you can water the vegetables. Feel free to let me know which was your favorite, and I really hope that you enjoyed this episode, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!